A gust of wind howls through the deserted highway as frost shards dance across the windshield. Ethan Cole's beat-up sedan sputters and coughs to a halt, dead as the winter dawn. He steps out, boots crunching on ice breath fogging in the air. Just ahead, a gleaming sports car lies stranded, its taillights flickering. Heart-pounding, Ethan wrestles the hood open, revealing a tangle of wires and a frozen ignition. He pulls out his worn wrench and, with hands red from cold and determination, reconnects the loose leads. Sparks leap. The engine roars to life, breaking the morning silence like thunder. In that charged moment, Ethan has no idea that the woman behind the wheel isn't just any driver. She's Victoria Lane billionaire heiress, and this simple rescue will set off a cascade of events poised to reshape his and his daughter's future forever. If you've ever believed in the power of one good deed, drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and ring the bell to follow Ethan's journey. Ethan Cole's small-town garage breathes oil and cold metal. The space heater wheezes between bursts of snow through the single-pane window as morning light creeps in. He rubs his hands together, trying to coax warmth back into stiff fingers. Across the workbench, 7-year-old Lily, bundled in an oversized flannel shirt, carefully lines up greasy wrenches, her tongue peeking out in concentration. "Nice and neat," Ethan murmurs, his voice thick from sleep. "Just like we practiced." Lily beams her cheeks rosy and places the last 14mm socket between two 13s. Ethan cracks a grin. "See, you've got the touch." By 6:30 a.m., the smell of sizzling bacon and fresh maple syrup drifts in from the small kitchenette. Ethan flips a pancake, its edges crisping against the skillet. Every moment here in this cluttered, oil-stained space is a balancing act between necessity and longing. The faded calendar on the wall shows the 15th rent day. The supply order for next week still sits overdue, but each pancake, each wrench turned is a promise to Lily. "We'll make it, kiddo." He sets a plate before her. Lily picks up a fork and digs in. "Can we fix real cars today?" she asks, mouth half full. Ethan chuckles. "Yep. Mr. Rogers is bringing in that Oldsmobile. I'll teach you how to replace a belt." Lily's eyes light at the thought of grease and gears. Their routine is familiar: drop off Lily at school. By 7:45, hustle through 3 or 4 jobs before lunch. Maybe squeeze in a quick oil change between errands. Business is slow, but the bills won't wait. A faded flyer tacked near the coffee maker advertises Ethan's affordable auto repair. It's been there since he took over this rundown shop after his wife passed. Back then he dreamed of grandeur, state-of-the-art lifts, a waiting room with magazines and a TV. Now he's just grateful to keep the doors open. At 7:15, he slides into the driver's seat of the sedan. "Seatbelt on," he asks. Lily clicks it into place. "Ready," she says, tucking her scarf. They pull onto Main Street, the frost glinting in early sun. On the corner, Mrs. Alvarez waves from her bakery's window. She left donuts for them yesterday when she heard about their stalled heater. It's moments like these small acts of kindness that anchor Ethan's faith in people. After depositing Lily at school with a hug and a promise to pick her up for lunch if he can, Ethan heads back to the shop. The bell over the door jingles as he steps inside, greeted by the familiar grind of machinery and the damp chill clinging to walls. He rubs his hands together again and flips on the overhead light. His first customer rolls in, Mr. Rogers hunched behind the wheel of a rust-speckled Oldsmobile engine, sputtering. Ethan flips the hood open and plunges into diagnostics while Mr. Rogers hovers with hopeful eyes. "You think it's the water pump?" he asks. Ethan examines the puddle of coolant on the floor, nods. "Looks like it. I'll swap it out. Tighten the belt, and you'll be back on the road." Relief floods the older man's face. As Ethan works, he pauses to wipe sweat and grime from his brow. The heater is still on the fritz, but this job and the next 4 lined up means enough to cover rent and groceries. He thinks of Lily piano lessons are coming due next month. He can't let her dreams stall. Between customers, he checks his phone. No missed calls, no messages from Victoria Lane. He hasn't heard from the woman whose car he saved 3 mornings ago. Probably better, she's a busy CEO after all. But he can't shake the memory of her crystal blue gaze and silk gloves. By mid-morning, a young couple arrives with a stalling transmission on their hatchback. Lily's drawing of their family taped to the sun visor makes him smile. He charges them a fair price, feeling the familiar tug of pride when they thank him for honesty. Word of mouth has a slow burn here, but kindness is currency. At lunch, he grabs a cold sandwich from Mrs. Alvarez's bakery charge. It to his tab, he promises. He takes a moment to sit behind the shop, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. Lily's crayon note. Love you. Dad, taped to the dashboard, catches his eye. He traces the scrawled letters, breath-catching. The daily grind, for all its struggle, is worth this, the warmth of her belief in him. The afternoon brings a flat tire repair, a stubborn oil leak, and a half-finished brake inspection. Each task demands focus, sweat, and resolve. Customers come and go, offering friendly nods or sympathetic glances. They know Ethan's story, a widowed dad doing his best. In return, they tip an extra $1, bring baked goods, or share a kind word. As dusk approaches, the temperature drops. Ethan steps out to lock the Oldsmobile's hood before signaling Mr. Rogers off. The sky darkens. Snowflakes begin to drift, catching in ether. He breathes deeply, senses sharpened by cold. He wonders again about Victoria Lane, her car, and the opportunity she hinted at. Could his life really change beyond oil stains and late nights? He flips off the sign and turns to the closed doors. The bell jingles a final time as he loads his tools into the back of his sedan. Tomorrow, he'll do it all again. Stack wrenches, flip pancakes, fix cars, and keep the promise. But tonight, as he heads home under a hush of falling snow, a spark of possibility warms him more than any heater ever could. That morning, the world felt heavier than usual. Ethan Cole's breath steamed in the frigid air as he slipped into his threadbare coat, the hem damp with last night's melting snow. He turned the key in his sedan's ignition and winced at the sputter fuel was dangerously close to empty. His eyes flicked to the clock, 7:12 a.m. Lily's school bus would arrive in less than 10 minutes. He threw a glance at the gas gauge again. Just enough, he muttered, more to himself than the car. Ethan eased onto the highway tires, crunching over frost-hardened gravel. Headlights from distant cars painted pale tunnels through the morning haze. His mind raced through the day's to-do list drop. Lily at school, swing by the station for gas, if he had any left, pickup parts for Mrs. Alvarez's van, and pray the heater in the shop held out just one more week. As his sedan rounded a gentle curve, headlights cut through the fog, a lone silhouette of a sports car midnight blue against the muted white landscape. Its hazard lights blinked like a pulse, urgent, desperate. Ethan's heart thudded an echo of the rescue 3 days ago. He glanced at his fuel gauge again. The needle dipped toward E, but his conscience left him no choice. He tapped the brake, swerved onto the shoulder, and skidded to a stop. Snow crunched under his boots as he hustled out, breath hitching in icy shards. Up close, the car was flawless paint, gleaming curves that belonged on a showroom floor, not a lonely roadside. Behind the wheel, a woman wrapped in a tailored coat shivered, phone clutched to her ear. Even from a distance, Ethan recognized her. Victoria Lane, the billionaire CEO, whose life he'd unwittingly upended when he first helped her days ago. Need some help? He called, stepping onto the snowbank. She lowered the phone, eyes widening. In her gaze, he saw relief, surprise, and something unreadable, perhaps resignation. I'm stuck, she admitted, voice trembling in the cold. Battery's dead. Roadside said they'll be at least an hour. Ethan ducked under the hood, fingers fumbling through thick gloves. Frost clung to every surface. He tapped a loose cable free, gave it a nudge, and crossed his fingers. Try it now, he said, voice raspy. She slid in, turned the key. The engine coughed, then roared as if waking from a long sleep. Victoria exhaled a plume of gratitude and cold air mingling. You're a lifesaver, she said, stepping out. Her boots left prints beside his. He wiped his hands on his coat, just paying it forward. Her gaze flickered to his car. Is that your gas tank, blinking empty? He nodded with a rueful smile. Running on fumes, but worth it if it means you're safe. Victoria's lips curved in a small, knowing smile. Thank you, Ethan. They worked in tandem, securing the hood and stowing tools. A silence settled, comfortable and charged, as if they both recognized the familiar rhythm of rescue. Then Victoria straightened, brushing snow from her coat. I owe you again. Ethan shrugged. No debts. Just glad you're okay. She hesitated, gaze drifting to the empty road ahead. I have to get to the city this morning, she said quietly. Important meeting. He studied her. Her business world demanded her presence. His world demanded he push onward despite the empty tank. I'll ride shotgun. We'll split the gas in the conversation. Victoria blinked. You'd do that. He offered her a half grin. You saved my day last time. Consider this even. She opened her door. All right. They climbed into his sedan. Inside warmth replaced frost, and the soft hum of the engine felt like a heartbeat. Lily's drawing of her family on the dashboard caught Victoria's eye. She's your daughter. Ethan's voice softened. Lily, 7. Keeps me grounded. Victoria nodded, tracing the crayon lines. She's amazing. They began the slow crawl back onto the highway. The sky turned pale blue, the sunrise glinting off ice crystals. Words came easily between them, a shared laugh over Lily's latest antics, a conversation about the unpredictability of life, sprinkled with observations on frost patterns and engine diagnostics. Halfway to the city, Ethan felt the car judder as the tank neared empty. He eased into a small rural station, the pumps old but welcoming. As he filled the tank, Victoria stretched, tucking her hair behind an ear. I never thanked you properly, she said, leaning against the sedan. You didn't have to stop. I should have waited. He shrugged, wiping his hands. Maybe not. You did the same for me once. She met his eyes. You really helped me see something important that day. He glanced away, heart tightening. We all need a little help sometimes. Inside the station's mini-mart, he grabbed 2 coffees black for him with a splash of cream for her. They stood side by side at the counter, steam curling from the cups. Victoria took a slow sip. Your faith in people. It's rare. Ethan lifted his mug. You'd be surprised how often it pays off. She turned the cup, gazing at the logo, a faded gear and wrench. Underneath, someone had scrawled, Keep the faith. He laughed softly. Prophetic graffiti. Outside, the city skyline shimmered in the distance. Victoria slid into the passenger seat, coffee in hand. Ethan eased back onto the highway, city traffic, growing thicker with each mile. They approached Orion Motors' headquarters, a glass monolith soaring against the pale sky. Victoria's lips curved in a small, appreciative smile. Home. Ethan pulled to the valet lane. He offered her the coffee. Here. She accepted it and turned the cup between her hands. Ethan, thank you. For everything. He tipped his head. Good luck in there. Victoria's gaze softened, and for a heartbeat she seemed on the verge of saying more. Then she slipped out of the car, coffee in hand, and disappeared into the revolving doors. Ethan watched her go. Lily's drawing caught his eye again, a reminder of why he worked so hard, braved so much. He turned the key engine rumbling beneath him, then headed back down the road toward the open fields, the rising sun at his back. As he drove, frost melted on the windshield, and with each mile he carried the warmth of possibility. Today, a simple act of kindness had bridged 2 very different worlds. Tomorrow, who knew? For Ethan and Lily, the horizon was frost-tipped but wide open. The bitter wind bit through Ethan's coat as he crouched beneath Victoria Lane's gleaming sports car, the engine compartment a maze of polished metal and complex wiring. His gloved fingers brushed away frost and soot until they found a connector, its wire frayed and barely clinging to the ignition coil. He tilted his head, gauging the angle, then drew a deep breath of cold air before tightening the bolt with practiced precision. Steam hissed into the air, curling like a ghost from the engine block. A stray wisp of morning sunlight caught on the car's hood, turning the polished surface into a fragment of sky. Ethan straightened, pausing to rub his hands together, then stepped back to throw the switch. Victoria slid into the driver's seat, her posture tense with anticipation. The dashboard lights flickered on, and Ethan watched rooftops of analog gauges dance to life. She cranked the key. At first, the engine wheezed like a deep sigh after a long winter's sleep, but then it roared into a steady purr that thrummed through the tires to the frozen ground. Victoria exhaled, pressing her palm to the dash. Hope shimmered in her eyes, reflecting the sudden warmth in the engine's rumble. It's running, she whispered, voice soft as the thawing snow. Ethan brushed a lock of dark hair back from her face. Always happy to help. His words sounded more earnest than he'd meant. Her gratitude hung between them, fragile and luminous. She slid from the car and stepped onto the shoulder boots, crunching in the gravel. Her tailored coat brushed the snow as she approached him. I don't know how to thank you, she said, pulling her scarf tighter. The morning light caught a glint in her eyes, far more than relief. something like wonder. He shrugged, turning back to tuck his hands into his pockets. Just doing my job. She hesitated, then pulled a small piece of paper from her purse. Still, she insisted, pressing it into his palm. If you ever need anything at all, call me. Ethan looked down at her elegant handwriting, a phone number clean and confident on the white square. He felt a tug in his chest as he slipped it into his coat pocket. Thanks, he said, nodding once. She gave him a tentative smile, the kind that warmed his chest. Then she paused, raising a hand as if to step closer, perhaps to say more, but the moment skipped away like a bird startled from its perch. She turned and slid behind the wheel, the engine's steady hum filling the space. Ethan stood watching until the sports car melted into the mist of the empty road. The hush that followed was vast, broken only by the distant traffic. He closed his eyes and let the memory of Victoria's eyes linger, the gratitude, the gentle surprise of her discovery that someone cared enough to stop. He climbed back into his sedan, the heater groaning to life. The seatbelt scraped against his coat as he settled in. For a moment he remembered Lily's small hand slipping into his on cold mornings, the way her laughter melted the frost. He found himself tracing the outline of the paper number in his pocket. The ride home was a slow glide through the quiet town. Steam drifted from manhole covers, and the few early commuters kept their headlights low. Ethan passed the familiar street where Mrs. Alvarez's minivan was parked, another job waiting tomorrow. For once his mind wasn't on parts or payments or the steady march of time. It was on that single moment, the car coming to life, Victoria's soft whisper, and the way kindness can astonish even the most guarded heart. Pulling into his driveway, he glanced at the small sagging porch where Lily waited. She bounded down the sidewalk, hair a tangle of curls, cheeks pink from the chill. "Daddy," she called, skidding to a stop. Her breath formed little clouds as she held up a drawing. "Look what I made at school, our family." Ethan lifted her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her temple. He felt the life in her small frame, the boundless energy, and the unwavering faith in his promise to keep them afloat. He rocked her gently, smiling as she jabbed at the paper with a stubby crayon. "It's perfect, kiddo," she beamed. "And I wrote your name on the back so Miss Vanessa can't take it." He laughed, settling her inside and heading for the kitchen. The remnants of last night's dinner waited in Tupperware on the counter. As he warmed soup and bread, Lily chattered about her day, her teacher's funny socks, the new girl in class, how the recess slide was icy but the best kind of slippery. Ethan stirred the soup slowly, mind drifting back to the morning's rescue. Lily had skipped breakfast in her excitement and tugged at his sleeve. "Can I have pancakes, Daddy?" He plated the soup, then turned to reach for the griddle. "Pancakes are on the menu," he promised. As the sweet scent of batter sizzled in the pan, the kitchen filled with warmth. Lily's small chair scraped as she climbed up, eyes following the steam rising from the pancake stack. Ethan flipped the flapjacks with a practiced flick, each one golden and fluffy. He set the plate before her with a flourish. "Thanks, Daddy," she said between bites, chin dotted with syrup. He smiled, his thoughts settling. Somehow, in the course of one long morning, the world had grown both larger and smaller. Larger because a billionaire CEO had crossed his path and entrusted him with her gratitude. Smaller because in his own home, sitting with Lily, he felt the entirety of life distilled into pancake mornings and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. He poured himself a cup of coffee, strong and black, and took a seat beside his daughter. She pressed a pancake into his hand. "Here, Daddy, this one's extra buttery." He bit into the pancake and tasted both salt and sweetness, hope and home. He glanced down at Lily's wide eyes, then tucked a stray curl behind her ear. Outside the world was still frosted in ice, but inside the small kitchen, warmth reigned. Ethan lifted his mug in a quiet toast to the morning's kindness, to the unexpected connections that shift destinies, and to the small, steadfast promise he made to Lily every dawn that no matter how cold the day, they would be all right. And in that simple moment between pancake bites and the hum of morning light, Ethan Cole knew that life's richest moments often arrive when you least expect them, and that a single act of kindness can ripple far beyond the icy shoulder of a lonely road. A week had slipped by like snow melting under a reluctant sun, and Ethan's world settled back into its familiar rhythm of wrenches, oil stains, and Lily's endless curiosity. Yet beneath that routine lay a quiet anticipation, an itch at the edge of his thoughts, that whispered Victoria Lane might reappear. He was elbow-deep in the engine of Mrs. Alvarez's minivan when the bell above the garage door jingled unexpectedly. The sound made him startle wrench slipping from his grasp. He straightened, wiping grease from his hands as Lily, perched on a stool beside him, dropped her toy car with a soft clatter. At the doorway stood Victoria. Not hurried or frazzled this time, but composed in a fitted coat and heels dusted with winter's last flurries. She carried no basket of baked goods, no envelope of opportunity, only a small smile that carried the weight of unresolved gratitude. "Hi, Ethan," she said, her voice weaving through the shop's scents of oil and mechanics' sweat. "Is this a good time?" He glanced at Lily, whose almond eyes widened in recognition. "Lily, remember," he murmured, but Lily was already on her feet, racing across the concrete floor to fling her arms around Victoria's knees. "Miss Victoria." Victoria knelt, gathering Lily into her arms. "Hello, Pumpkin. You've grown since I last saw you." She ruffled Lily's hair, and Lily giggled, breath-puffing like a little cloud. Ethan swallowed. His elbow itched with grease, but his heart hammered in his chest. "Come on in," he managed, nodding toward a cracked leather bench by the workbench. He gestured for Victoria to take the seat. "We're just finishing up here." Victoria tucked Lily's feet beneath her and turned to Ethan. "I know this isn't your usual office," she said, glancing around at hanging license plates and racks of lug wrenches. "But I wanted to talk face to face." He nodded, tapping a rag on his thigh. "What's on your mind?" She paused, eyes drifting to the floor where a dark puddle of oil reflected the overhead lights. For a moment, vulnerability flickered across her features, rare for the CEO who commanded boardrooms with effortless confidence. Then she looked up. "I've been thinking about that morning, about how you stepped in without hesitation." Ethan shrugged, ducking his head. "Anybody would have helped." Her lips curved in a sad smile. "Not anyone." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. "I hope you don't mind." She pressed it into his hand. "Consider this a thank you." He stared at the envelope, then up at her. "You don't have to." She shook her head. "I want to." Her gaze softened as she watched Lily inch forward, tugging at her sleeve. "Lily, do you want to say hello properly?" Lily nodded, scooting off Victoria's lap and grabbing her hand. Together they walked around the bench and approached Ethan. He crouched to Lily's level heart, warming as she showed him her favorite Barbie doll. She babbled about its sparkly shoes and how Miss Victoria made her pancake that morning extra buttery. Victoria laughed, and the sound was like the first thaw of spring in Ethan's chest. He stood and slipped the white envelope into his coat pocket. "Let's head inside," he said, nodding toward the reception area. Lily bounced between them, her cheeks rosy with excitement. Inside, the small waiting room smelled of coffee and old magazines. Ethan offered Victoria a seat on the battered leather sofa while Lily perched on the armrest. He stood before her, expression unreadable. "I wanted to apologize." Victoria began pressing her palms together. "For dropping that strange invitation via text. I know it must have come out of nowhere." Ethan shook his head. "You didn't have to explain." He took a deep breath, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease. "Really, it's no problem." She nodded slowly, searching his face. "You deserve more of an explanation." She lifted her chin and spoke with calm conviction. "I'm not just here because I can't fix a car without help. I owe you for what you did, yes, but I also want to repay your kindness by giving you a second chance." He blinked. A second chance. The word struck both familiar and strange. He had given up on his own dreams long ago. Dreams of a bigger shop, a better life for Lily, a future unchained from oil pans and overdue bills. "Second chance," he echoed. Victoria reached into her purse again, this time pulling out a slim folder stamped with the Orion Motors logo. She handed it to him. "I came to formally offer you a position," she said. "Not the managerial role, though we still believe you'd excel there, but something more tailored. We're expanding our community outreach program. We want someone with hands-on experience, someone who understands real people's needs. I want you to head that initiative." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He flipped the folder open to reveal documents outlining a role that bridged corporate resources with grassroots automotive education workshops for underprivileged youth, free safety checks in rural areas, mentorship programs. He closed the folder. I don't know what to say. Victoria smiled softly. Say you'll consider it. She leaned forward, eyes earnest. You have knowledge and empathy this world needs. I want to give you the resources to make a bigger impact both for your family and for the people you've been serving all along. Lily clambered off the armrest, planting her small feet on the floor. She looked up at Ethan with question in her bright eyes. He knelt, placing a hand on her shoulder. Do you think your dad should do something new, kiddo? Lily's face scrunched in thought, then lit up. Yes. She threw her arms around his neck. You'll help so many kids, Daddy, like you helped me. Ethan swallowed emotions roiling like engine oil left to settle. He looked at Victoria, at Lily's trusting face, then felt the promise of possibility unfurl within him. His entire life had been spent repairing others' vehicles, patching up the broken parts to keep them moving. Now someone offered to repair his dreams, to stitch back the frayed edges of hope. He straightened, clearing his throat. I'd like that. His words felt fragile but real. Thank you. Victoria's smile blossomed. She reached across to shake his hand, then touched his arm. Welcome aboard, she said, and in that moment the dusty waiting room full of empty chairs seemed to transform into a launch pad for new beginnings. Ethan watched as Victoria rose to leave, Lily waving furiously with a glee that lit the dreary space. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the horizon shift. It no longer felt like a distant frozen expanse. Instead, it promised fresh starts, second chances, and uncharted roads begging to be traveled together. As the door closed behind them, he exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Lily leaned against his side and he wrapped an arm around her. Ready to learn something new tomorrow? He asked, voice low with wonder. She nodded, eyes shining. Can I come? He ruffled her hair. You'll be my top apprentice. In the quiet that followed, Ethan Cole felt his world expand, not because of bolts or engines, but because someone had seen his worth and handed him a second chance to run beyond the boundaries he'd drawn for himself. And with that gift, he vowed to build a future for Lily richer than any engine he had ever fixed. That night, after the last taillights disappeared into the frosted darkness, Ethan Cole stood in his kitchen, the lingering hum of possibility still thrumming through his veins. He'd spent the evening tucking Lily into bed, inhaling the steely comfort of her small shoulders rising and falling in sleep, and replaying Victoria Lane's words. I want to give you a second chance, like a melody he couldn't shake. He washed the day's grease from his hands, the warm water sliding over calloused knuckles that had known little but hard work. As he dried off, his phone buzzed sharply against the counter, jolting him upright. The screen glowed with an unfamiliar number. He frowned, no missed calls. He flipped the phone over and back again, curiosity warring with caution. Hello? He answered, voice rough from sleep. Mr. Cole. A crisp professional female voice answered. This is Claire Bennett from Orion Motors. I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Lane. She's recommended you for a managerial interview. She mentioned your name to our hiring coordinator today. Managerial interview. The words felt too big, too sudden. Ethan's heart jerked. He wrapped a dish towel around his fingers, knuckles whitening. Ma'am, I think you have the wrong number, he stammered. I'm just a small-town mechanic. I fix starter motors and leaky radiators. I'm not sure why a CEO would recommend me. Claire's tone was patient, encouraging. No mistake, Mr. Cole. Ms. Lane was quite clear. She admires the work you do and believes you'd be an excellent fit for our community outreach division. We have an opening for someone with your hands-on experience. Would you be available to come in for an interview this Wednesday at 10? Ethan closed his eyes, leaning against the counter as the kitchen lights cast him in a soft glow. He pictured Lily at breakfast tomorrow, chilly breath steaming over a bowl of cereal. He pictured all the times he'd scraped together enough money for hot chocolate after school, only to settle for juice pouches. He thought of the leaky roof over Lily's head, the rusted heater he'd promised to replace as soon as I can. His pride, that stubborn lump in his throat, snarled at the idea of walking into a gleaming glass tower. What would he wear? His scuffed boots, his two faded flannel shirts. He could barely fill the gas tank on payday. But then he saw Lily's face, hopeful beyond her years, and knew he would swallow every ounce of doubt. Wednesday at 10, he said, voice firmer. Yes. Thank you. Claire's relief came through the line in a gentle exhale. Excellent. I'll email you the details. We look forward to meeting you. He hung up, staring at the black rectangle as though it might burst into flames. The words Community Outreach Division blinked in his mind. Suddenly, the garage felt too small, the oil stains on the floor like chains he was meant to break. He loaded a mug with coffee strong enough to rattle his insides and settled at the kitchen table. The night was silent except for the ritual drip of the faucet and the low hum of the refrigerator. He opened his laptop, hands trembling slightly, and found an email from Orion Motors. He clicked it open. Dear Mr. Cole, thank you for your willingness to explore this opportunity. Please arrive at our headquarters, 1034 Innovation Drive, this Wednesday at 10:00 a.m. Please bring a resume and any references. Dress code is business casual. We look forward to discussing how your expertise can support our new community initiatives. He blinked. Business casual. He didn't own a suit, but he had an extra button-down shirt still crisp, a pale blue that used to feel like $1,000,000 when he bought it for his wedding. He'd pressed it carefully that morning. His hands left faint grease smudges on the collar, even now, but he would make it work. He sipped the coffee, bitterness and sweetness mingling on his tongue. The steam curled in the low light as though carrying his doubts into the ceiling. What if it was a joke? What if he tripped over the receptionist? Set his coffee down on a folder that wasn't his, and someone noticed the name Cole was more gas station than corporate. He pictured Lily's grin. If things went well, not only better coats and warmer snacks, but perhaps a future where her father stood proud in a crisp office, no longer weighed down by bills and broken heaters. He saw her running through a bigger house, unafraid of snow through thin windows, her pajamas cozy against the winter wind. His heart swelled with hope so big it nearly pushed the table off its legs. He sat up straighter, clenching and unclenching his fists. All right, he whispered, let's do this. The next morning dawned gray and brittle frost coating every surface like sugar on a donut. Ethan's phone alarm yanked him from a restless sleep. He padded into the kitchen, lit the kettle, and recalled last night's promise. He'd told Lily he had an important meeting, and she'd looked at him with eyes so bright he almost cracked under the weight of her faith. He made coffee and buttered toast, watching Lily dart around in her small coat that swallowed her arms. She clutched her backpack ready for school. He knelt, brushing hair from her face. You know I've got to go help some people today, right? She nodded solemnly. Be brave, Daddy, and don't forget to smile. He laughed, planting a kiss on her forehead. I won't, kiddo. You have fun at school. As he drove through the sleepy streets, Ethan ran through what he'd say if someone asked. So, Mr. Cole, tell us about yourself. He'd tell them he was a mechanic who believed in second chances, first for himself, then for the kids who needed guidance just like Lily had needed him. He'd explain how he'd taught Lily to fix her toy car's wheels, how every loose bolt on a family sedan represented a chance to keep someone's world moving. When he pulled up to the Orion Motors headquarters, a tower of mirrored glass that stretched toward a pale morning sky, his breath caught. He gripped the steering wheel as though holding a lifeline. He straightened his shirt collar, smoothed hair from his forehead, and stepped out into the cold. Inside, the lobby gleamed. Polished floors reflected his scuffed boots. Business professionals in crisp attire strode by, briefcases clicking on tile. He felt the weight of every stare, but also the pull of possibility pulling him forward. A friendly receptionist directed him to conference room B. He waited, heart-drumming, as he stared at his reflection in the frosted glass. He straightened his shoulders, reminding himself he'd fixed cars and saved days. He'd earned this. Moments later, the door opened and Claire Bennett ushered him in. He shook hands with a panel of directors, including Victoria Lane herself, who greeted him with a genuine smile that banished any lingering imposter's doubt. Ethan cleared his throat, voice steady under her gaze. Thank you for this chance, he began. I'm ready to bring everything I've learned in my little garage, the kindness, the problem-solving, the heart to your community outreach initiatives. Because sometimes the smallest gestures can change lives, just the way Ms. Lane's did for me. He spoke of Lily and the families he'd served during free safety checks of nights spent patching engines in freezing cold. He spoke of hope of second chances and of what he could give back when given the resources. When he finished, the room was still. Then Victoria stood and extended her hand. Welcome to Orion Motors, Mr. Cole. We're thrilled to have you. Around the table, nods and handshakes followed warmth blooming like spring in that chilly boardroom. Ethan sank into the chair beside them, disbelief and joy mingling under his skin. In that moment, he saw more than four polished walls. He saw a path forward lit by a simple act of kindness on an icy roadside. As he drove home that afternoon, the world felt wider, brighter. He'd said yes to a future he once tucked away as impossible. With every turn of the wheel, he carried Lily's hope, Victoria's belief, and his own dream of fixing more than engines of fixing futures. And this time, he knew the best was still to come. Ethan stepped through the double-glass doors of Orion Motors with a slow, steady breath, the click of his scuffed boots on the polished marble echoing in the cavernous lobby. He paused just inside, collecting himself his suited colleagues. Brilliant engineers, sharp-eyed analysts, and polished executives turned to study him in silent surprise. Here he was, the small-town mechanic with grease still in his veins and a heart worn proudly on his sleeve, suddenly thrust into the sleek heart of a corporate giant. He smoothed his slightly rumpled shirt, willing his knees not to tremble, and let his eyes travel upward to the soaring atrium above. Sunlight streamed through glass walls and skylights, tracing geometrical patterns on the floor. In one corner, a digital ticker scrolled stock values. In another, a reception desk manned by impeccably dressed professionals hummed with quiet efficiency. Ethan felt the familiar tang of motor oil and warm coffee in his pocket, remnants of long hours at his garage, and was suddenly conscious of every stitch, every thread, even the way his boots squeaked against these gleaming floors. "Good morning," a voice called softly behind him. Ethan turned to see Victoria Lane approaching her presence, as effortless and commanding as it had been on that icy shoulder weeks before. Her tailored blazer and understated jewelry spoke of confidence. Her warm smile spoke of reassurance. "Ready for your first orientation session?" He managed a nod, clearing his throat. "As ready as I'll ever be." They walked side by side, making their way to a bank of elevators. Colleagues shot curious glances their way, some welcoming, others skeptical, but Victoria seemed to glide through the scrutiny unbothered. Ethan tried to match her stride, clutching the folded piece of paper in his pocket. Lily's crayon scrawl, "Best Fixer Ever." He pressed it like a talisman against his thigh, feeling its gentle, unshakable certainty. In the elevator mirrors reflected his anxious face back at him. A pang of imposter syndrome knotted his stomach. He'd spent years under the fluorescent lights of his own dingy shop, guiding Lily's small fingers around greasy wrenches. Here he sat among high-performing managers who wielded spreadsheets like weapons and spoke of leveraging assets and synergetic growth. He swallowed hard. The doors opened quietly on the 20th floor. As they stepped into the corridor, the soft carpet muted their footsteps. Victoria led him to a conference room outfitted with ergonomic chairs and state-of-the-art screens. Ethan took a seat, noticing how the polished wood table gleamed under the recessed lights. He couldn't help but glance at the unfamiliar jargon projected on screen slides on KPIs, return on investment forecasts, strategic roadmaps. His throat ran dry, and he tapped a restless foot, recalling Lily's voice from the night before. "Be brave, Daddy." A bespectacled trainer, clipboard in hand, welcomed them. "Welcome, Mr. Cole. We're delighted you've joined Orion's Community Engagement Division. Today you'll learn about our corporate structure key performance indicators and how we measure impact across our global markets." The trainer's words rolled out smoothly, like well-oiled machinery. Ethan nodded, trying to anchor himself as the acronyms and buzzwords piled on: EBITDA, margins, stakeholder alignment, brand equity. He leaned forward in his chair, listening intently as the trainer segued into a case study. Imagine a rural community where access to reliable transportation is limited. Our program provides educational workshops on basic vehicle maintenance, ensuring safety and affordability. "Mr. Cole," the trainer said, pausing to let the attention shift. "We're counting on your expertise to shape these workshops. How would you engage such a community?" Ethan's heart pounded, but he met the trainer's gaze. He pictured those mornings in his garage, Lily kneeling at his side, oil-smudged hands twisting spark plugs. Faces of neighbors relieved by his willingness to teach. "I'd start by listening," he began, voice steadying. "Find out their most pressing needs. Maybe it's tire safety or changing oil with limited resources. then break down each step tool's safety cost into simple hands-on modules. I'd bring examples right to their doorstep. Broken starter motors, leaky radiators. Nothing beats seeing a problem solved in real time. And I'd make sure every family leaves with the confidence to tackle basic repairs themselves. The room was quiet for a heartbeat. Then Victoria offered an encouraging nod. Exactly the kind of practical insight we need. A ripple of agreement followed among the managers gathering around the table. Ethan exhaled surprise, warming his chest. He had a seat at this table after all. The rest of the morning blurred into a flurry of introductions and departmental overviews. He met marketing strategists who spoke of campaigns that showcased Orion's philanthropic work finance officers who modeled cost-benefit analyses and technology leads innovating electric drivetrains. Every conversation buzzed with promise and just a touch of skepticism. By lunch, Ethan's nerves had settled into a cautious curiosity. He stepped into the employee cafe, a bright space offering gourmet sandwiches alongside artisanal lattes. Nervously, he set out his own packed lunch, a humble turkey sandwich on wheat and an apple from his crisper drawer at home. He found an empty seat and pulled out Lily's note, smoothing it across the table as a reminder of where he came from and why he was here. A young woman in a sharp pencil skirt slid into the seat across from him. Her name tag read, Marisol, Program Coordinator. She smiled warmly. Mr. Cole. Write Ethan, please. I heard about your background. I spearhead our rural outreach programs. Your insights this morning were exactly what I've been hoping for. Ethan blinked. Thank you, he said, setting Lily's note beside his lunch as he extended his hand. In her handshake, he felt genuine excitement, not the insulated formality he'd braced for. As they talked, he found himself describing the little details that lit up his world, teaching his daughter to check tire pressure on her Hot Wheels, saving a stranded teacher's van, so she could make it home before dark, the gratitude in their eyes. Marisol laughed as he spoke, leaning in as though his stories were the best case studies she'd ever heard. After lunch, Ethan rejoined the afternoon session, a deep dive into stakeholder engagement. By mid-afternoon, he'd already sketched plans for pop-up clinics in underfunded towns, volunteer training modules, and a mentorship program pairing seasoned technicians with high school students. Every idea felt alive, fertile with potential. He realized he was speaking not as an outsider, but as someone who knew the heartbeat of these communities. Late in the day, Victoria reappeared in the doorway, her heels clicking softly on the carpet. She offered him a cup of coffee, which he accepted gratefully. She leaned back against the frame, watching him survey the whiteboard where he'd scribbled Mobile Maintenance Unit beside Youth Tech scholarships. Impressive, she said quietly. You've made this room your own. Ethan glanced at her, carefully hiding his surprise. I'm just trying to bring what I know. She handed him the coffee cup. Exactly. And remember that note in your pocket. She nodded toward his folded papers. He reached in, fingers brushing the crayon scrawl. Lily, he murmured. She's right, Victoria said, her voice soft but firm. You are Orion's best fixer ever. They shared a smile, that unspoken understanding passing between them. A small-town mechanic was bringing something no MBA could teach. His knowledge of wrenches and warm hearts was precisely the kind of synergy this company needed. As the sun cast long shadows through the glass facade, Ethan packed away his notepad, gathering the day's insights into a neat stack. The corporate buzzwords no longer felt like a foreign language. He'd already translated them into concrete plans that would get dirty and human hands moving. On his way out, a group of colleagues stopped to thank him, some for his practical suggestions, others for a fresh perspective that bridged the gap between boardroom strategy and real-world grit. Ethan scuffed boots. Once the source of his self-doubt felt steady, purposeful. Victoria walked him back to the lobby where the sky had shifted from bright morning blue to the soft hues of evening. You did well today, she said. Tomorrow we'll start aligning your ideas with our budget forecasts and volunteer network. But tonight, take pride in what you've accomplished. Ethan nodded, the weight of the day settling into his bones as a quiet triumph. He stepped back into the cool night air, the skyscraper's lights shimmering behind him like fireworks for a handiwork well done. Driving home, he held Lily's note against the steering wheel. The marble floors and corporate cadence of Orion Motors were steps on a path he never imagined walking, but every echo of those squeaking boots now felt like a heartbeat, proof that glass and gears could coexist in harmony and that kindness once sown could transform even the loftiest halls of power. Ethan stepped into the conference room the next morning, coffee cup in hand, already tasting the anticipation and tension in the air. His mind still hummed with conversations from the day before, Marisol's bright ideas, the nods of encouragement from mid-level managers, Victoria's steady confidence. But as he settled into the familiar circle of swivel chairs, he caught sight of Tom across the glossy table. Tom's tailored suit and crisp shirt looked as press-ready as it did yesterday, but today there was something sharper in his eyes, a barely concealed sneer. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," Tom said, voice dripping something more like challenge than courtesy. "Ready to swap wrenches for KPIs again?" Ethan took a measured breath, lowering his coffee to the table. He tightened his fingers around the handle until his knuckles whitened, but he reminded himself of Lily's hug last night, how she'd wrapped small arms around his neck, her eyes bright as she whispered, "You can do it, Dad." That promise echoed in his chest now. He wasn't here to prove Tom right or wrong. He was here for her. "Good morning, Tom," Ethan replied evenly. "Happy to share any metrics you need." Tom's lips curled. "I was hoping we could discuss your proposal for the mobile maintenance unit." He tapped a glossy presentation folder in front of Ethan. "But first, let's address qualifications. You know, most people here went to engineering school or have 10 years of corporate experience. Well, he let the sentence trail off, hovering in the stale air. Some of the higher-ups glanced Tom's way, eyebrows lifting like rainfall collecting on a roof. Ethan felt the heat rise in his cheeks, but forced himself to stay calm. "I know my background isn't typical," he said, voice-controlled, "but I believe hands-on experience brings perspective." Tom smiled as if Ethan had just confessed to carving figurines out of cheese. "Perspective is great, but can it scale? Scale is what matters when you're deploying programs across 30 states." Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the table. He pictured every teacher whose bus he'd fixed at dawn, every neighbor who'd learned to change an oil filter with his patient guidance, and most of all, Lily's eager face at her school science fair. "Scaling isn't just a percentage, it's people," he said. "If you build trust in one town, those techniques can be replicated. You don't need a lesson plan written by committee, you need someone on site who understands the soil, the climate, and the tools. That's my expertise, and it can scale if you empower the right folks locally." The room sat silent. Tom's smug expression faltered as others exchanged glances. A soft cough from the back indicated interest rather than derision. Victoria, seated at the head of the table, offered Ethan a warm glance. "Well put," she said. "If I may add, we have pilot data from last quarter showing a 40% reduction in emergency roadside calls in towns where Ethan's model was informally tested. The numbers back his approach." Tom's lips thinned. He looked away, shifting in his chair. "Interesting data point," he muttered, then cleared his throat. "But formalizing it is another story." "Well," Ethan countered, "let's talk formalization. We train local volunteers as community ambassadors. They attend a 2-day workshop led by seasoned mechanics, supported by online modules for ongoing reference. We equip them with toolkits funded by community grants. In my experience, that's enough to keep 3 out of 5 breakdowns from needing tow trucks." He let that hang there, letting the logic settle. A few nods around the table told Ethan that he'd won at least a hearing. He sank back, chest easing, as Tom's stern gaze flickered with reluctant respect. The rest of the morning moved forward in a swirl of budget models and implementation timelines. Ethan contributing at every turn, his suggestions weaving easily into the corporate lexicon: ROI, per community coach volunteer retention rates, impact on insurance premiums. As lunchtime approached, the conversation had shifted from skepticism to cautious collaboration. Ethan ducked out for a quick break to catch his breath. The elevator ride down felt endless until he finally pressed the button and the doors slid closed. He gazed at his reflection, hair slightly ruffled, eyes bright with the promise of progress. He allowed himself a brief smile before remembering tomorrow Lily would be waiting for him at her school gates, lunchbox in hand, eager to hear every detail. At home that evening, the scent of tomato sauce and garlic greeted him before he even opened the front door. Lily's laughter drifted down the hallway as she and her mother cleared the table. Ethan paused, breathing in the warmth of family life after a day of boardroom battles. Daddy Lily dropped her puzzle pieces and ran into his arms. He scooped her up, feeling her small heart beating against his chest. She buried her cheek in his shirt. "Tell me you kicked corporate butt today." Ethan laughed, setting her down gently. She toddled ahead into the kitchen, pulling up a chair beside her mom. "I did my best," he said, wrapping an arm around his wife's shoulders as she turned to greet him with a tired smile of her own. Over meatballs and spaghetti, Lily peppered him with questions. "Did they like your idea? Did you show them how to change a tire? Did you make them promise to eat pancakes on Saturday?" Ethan answered, each with a flourish, using simple language but weaving in the complexity of big decisions, grant approvals, volunteer onboarding, and metrics. Lily's eyes grew big as he described towns once stranded and now running buses on time and teachers smiling. His wife reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "You did good," she said, her tone gentle, but certain. "I can see it in Lily's face." Lily beamed, then suddenly patted Ethan on the cheek. "You can do it, Dad," she said, and Ethan felt his vaccine of doubt slip away, inoculated by her unwavering faith. Later, after Lily was tucked into bed and the house's soft hum lulled into quiet, Ethan sat at his small desk in the corner of his home office. He unfolded Lily's crayon note again, "Best fixer ever," and placed it beside his notebook. Even here among balance sheets and program outlines it belonged. He jotted down new ideas, virtual check-ins for community volunteers, partnerships with local schools for vocational workshops, a fellowship for mechanics who wanted to join Orion temporarily before returning home. Tom's sneer that morning felt distant now, like static on a radio dial that you tune out once the signal clears. In its place was the trust of colleagues who'd given him room to speak the gratitude of board members who recognized value and lived experience, and above all, Lily's faith, which remained his true north. As he closed the notebook and turned off the desk lamp, Ethan whispered into the dark, "For you, kiddo." Outside, the stars blinked in the clear night sky, and a sense of possibility wrapped around him like a well-worn glove. Under scrutiny he had stood, and under scrutiny he had prevailed not by becoming someone he wasn't, but by staying exactly who he was, a dad with grease on his hands and hope in his heart, building second chances one community at a time. Ethan stepped off the elevator into the hushed tension of Orion's main testing lab, where the hum of diagnostic machines felt more like the slow ticking of a bomb. 2 days remained before the high-stakes launch of their new vehicle line, a projected multi-million-dollar debut. Now every engineer's eyes were dulled by panic. Screens lining one wall displayed line graphs that dipped ominously. Colored warning lights blinked. A knot tightened in Ethan's chest. He followed Victoria through rows of technicians huddled over laptops. "They've run every routine test," she said quietly, her voice steady but urgent. "But the rear suspension is failing the fatigue trials. The board is ready to postpone. We lose everything if we delay." Ethan swallowed and nodded. He felt suddenly dwarfed by the cavernous lab and by the slick credentials of the PhD engineers clustering around consoles. Yet Victoria's gaze on him held something trust, maybe even hope. He straightened his shoulders, recalling Lily's confident whisper in his ear, "That very morning, Dad fixes things." It was such a simple line, but right now it felt like armor. They reached the central table where a scale model of the suspension assembly lay dissected into numbered parts. The lead engineer, Anika, a soft-spoken woman with a remarkably calm demeanor, looked up. "We've pinpointed the weak spot in the damping valves. They're overheating under repeated load. We can reinforce the housing, but that means new tooling and a 2-week delay." Jeff from production shook his head, voice thick with defeat. "We can't afford that. Our competitors are already lining up pre-orders. We delay, we lose our edge." Ethan glanced at the model, then at the sea of anxious faces. His palms tingled. He stepped forward. What if he began carefully instead of redesigning the housing? We try a dynamic recalibration. Change the damping curve to shed heat differently. Use a higher viscosity fluid that disperses energy more gradually. He watched eyes raise in surprise and felt a flicker of wider interest around the table. "Higher viscosity fluid," Anika repeated. "Most of our tests indicated that would stiffen the ride too much." "True," Ethan said, "but hear me out. If we run a staged calibration, Start at lower damping rates and gradually ramp up as speed increases. You can keep peak temperatures under control without a full redesign. He traced a path through the schematic with his finger. You'd need to adjust the valve orifices by maybe 2%. It's minimal, shouldn't require new tooling, just a quick reprogram of the control algorithm and retrofit existing prototypes. Silence fell. Someone cleared their throat. The room's weight seemed to shift. Victoria stepped closer, eyes bright. Ethan, that's exactly the kind of out-of-the-box thinking we need. But can you back it up? Ethan drew a breath. I've seen a similar situation back in my shop. A customer's hydraulic lift was overheating under constant use. Instead of replacing the cylinder, I increased the bleed rate to cycle. The fluid reduced the heat peak by about 30%. It lasted a year without issue. He looked up. The principles are the same. Tom, who had been scowling in the corner, arched an eyebrow. That was a small stationary lift at 2,000 psi. We're talking variable loads at highway speeds. He sounded ready to dismiss Ethan again. But Ethan held his ground. All the more reason to simulate it here. Let's run a few cycle tests using this method on the bench units. If it shows promise, we incorporate it into the next round immediately. Worst case, we revert to your original housings, but at least we're trying to solve it without months of delay. Anika exchanged a look with her team. We can reprogram the test rig overnight, she said. We'll run a dozen cycles and watch the temperature curves. She turned to the technicians. Get me the test scripts and let's do this. A murmur of approval swept the room. Even Tom sounded grudgingly impressed. Fine, run the test, but don't waste time. Ethan nodded, voice steady. Right away. As the team scrambled, Victoria slipped an arm around his shoulder. You just might save this launch, she whispered. He managed a tense smile. Let's hope. Over the next 12 hours, the lab became a whirlwind of activity. Ethan hovered over monitors as digital readouts scrolled across screens, temperature spikes, pressure graphs, heat maps. The tension built with each cycle. At 50 cycles, the dampers warmed to 145 degrees Celsius, just within safe limits. At 75, they crested 150 degrees Celsius but plateaued. At 100, they peaked at 155 degrees Celsius, then stabilized as the fluid flow adjusted. Contrast that with the previous baseline tests that had shot to 185 degrees Celsius in under 50 cycles. Anika's eyes widened. This is incredible. The thermal load dropped by nearly 40%, and the ride quality margin, well, within spec. She looked at Ethan and laughed, half relieved, half exhilarated. You did it. Around them, engineers broke into smiles, exchanging high fives. The air crackled with renewed energy. Even Tom allowed himself a nod of respect. Victoria approached the boardroom door. We need to present these results, she said, voice bright enough to cut through the last of the tension. The launch goes on. Ethan leaned against a nearby bench, heart still galloping. Memory of Lily's hug last night surged warm through his chest. He reached into his pocket and touched the crayon note. Dad fixes things. He repeated to himself, smiling at how true it felt right now. As the team gathered, Ethan took a moment to breathe deeply of the cool lab air. The panic had dissolved, replaced by fierce pride for the engineers who'd rallied at a stranger's suggestion, for Victoria's unwavering belief in him, but most of all, for Lily. She hadn't seen the stress or the exhaustion. She only saw Dad fixes things. Her innocence had been the spark, and tonight that simple truth had rallied an entire company. Ethan watched his coworkers file into the boardroom, data in hand, ready to show the board that innovation sometimes comes from the most unlikely places. He waited outside, chest full, hands still faintly trembling with adrenaline. When Victoria emerged minutes later, her eyes shone. Board's unanimous, she said, sliding an arm through his. Launch is back on. He exhaled, steadied by her triumph. They walked together past flickering lab lights and humming machines, forging a new kind of respect between small-town grit and corporate ambition. Ethan paused beneath a towering window overlooking Orion's campus lights, twinkling like hope against the dark sky. He raised his hand as if to touch the stars. We did it, he whispered. Victoria squeezed his arm. You did it. And back at home somewhere out there, a little girl would wake tomorrow, knowing that her dad really could fix anything, even a $1 million crisis under impossible time pressure. The boardroom hummed with tension as Tom leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, skepticism etched into every line of his sharply tailored suit. He tapped a manicured fingernail on the polished mahogany table, his expression all but daring Ethan to fail. So he drawled, voice slick with condescension. "You want us to trust this makeshift fix on a multi-million-dollar launch?" "Seriously." Cole murmurs rippled around the room. Engineers exchanged uncertain glances. Even Victoria's usual air of unflappable confidence couldn't mask the faint crease at the corner of her eyes. She rose slowly, smoothing the lapels of her blazer. "Gentlemen," she began, voice crisp and authoritative, "we don't have weeks to spare. We have one shot at this." The room fell into a sudden hush. "Ethan's method isn't conventional, but neither is our deadline. We either recalibrate these dampers tonight, or we delay the launch, losing millions and our market edge." Tom's lip curled. "It's still a gamble." Victoria held his gaze. "She's a calculated gamble and backed by data. We run the tests. If it fails, we'll revisit Plan B. But right now, we owe it to the company to give this every chance." That final commanding note from Victoria snapped the board to attention. Orders flew at practical speed: clear the lab, assemble the rigs, alert the bench technicians, and gather every spare set of laptops. Within minutes, Orion's high-tech testing center metamorphosed into a war room fueled by espresso and purpose. Blueprints littered work tables like confetti. Wire-bound notebooks lay open pen scribbles, mapping out valve orifice adjustments. Cables snaked under desks, linking control modules to hydraulic jigs. Everyone moved with precise urgency, double-checking measurements that only hours ago had seemed impossible to trust. Ethan found himself at the epicenter, flanked by Annika and a half-dozen engineers. A kettle steamed in the corner, ready to feed the perpetual coffee demand. "All right," he said, voice calm but carrying the weight of decisive authority. "First, we swap in the higher viscosity fluid. Then we adjust the digital controller's ramp function. Remember, delay activation by 50 milliseconds to allow initial absorption of shock. We'll start each cycle at low amplitude, then step up incrementally." His tone threaded technical detail with easy confidence, exactly the leadership the room needed. Annika nodded, fingers flying over her keyboard. Lines of code scrolled down a monitor as she tweaked control parameters. Across the room, a technician loosened the filler cap on a suspension tank, draining the old oil into a drum. Another poured in the new fluid, its thicker consistency gleaming like molten brass. "Fluid swap complete," the technician called. Ethan dipped a slender probe into the reservoir and gave a satisfied nod. "Good. Now activate test rig 1. A lone engineer hit a green button on the main console. The hydraulic actuators rumbled into life. A camera zoomed in on the damper assembly beneath the platform. Data streams burst to life across multiple screens: temperature, pressure, damping coefficient, cycle count. The first cycle clicked by tension, compression. Tension, compression, steady as a metronome. The display registered a peak temperature of 130 degrees, so well below the previous 185 degrees of baseline. Ethan's brow furrowed as the rig cycled on. He leaned forward, hand resting lightly on a desk. "Okay, ramp to stage 2, double the stroke amplitude." The engineer complied. The rig jolted, mimicking rougher terrain. Screens flickered with new numbers. Heat crept upward, 142 to go up. Still within safe range. Ethan glanced at a small digital display recording ride quality metrics. Ride comfort delta is at 0.05 Gs, excellent. No detectable harshness. Tom folded his arms and watched silent. A hush of respect rippled through the room, but Ethan knew better than to relax. Stage 3, he called. Full amplitude, simulate highway speeds. The lab's overhead lights reflected off polished floors as the rig went to work. Hydraulic pistons hissed. The damper glowed under mechanical stress. Every cycle chipped away at doubt. At cycle 50, the peak temperature topped out at 153 degrees Celsius. Then stabilized, no runaway heat buildup. Everyone held their breath as the data scrolled. Annika punched the air. "We're holding!" she exclaimed, voice loud enough to break the stillness. No spikes, beyond spec. Around the room, technicians cheered. The board members exchanged excited glances. Even Tom cracked a half-smile, eyes glittering with reluctant approval. Ethan allowed himself a small, steady smile, but he kept watching another 40 cycles to go. At cycle 90, with dawn's pale light just beginning to peek through the lab's high windows, a hush fell. Data graphs glowed in sweeping arcs, pressure stayed smooth, thermal readings plateaued. The system began its final cool-down without a hitch. At cycle 100, the rig automatically shut down. Silence answered. Then Victoria let out a breath and the room erupted into applause. Engineers slapped backs and pumped fists. Board members rose to their feet, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. Tom stepped forward, extended his hand, and gave it a firm shake. "Well done," he said simply, voice deep. Ethan exhaled, swallowing the shudder of relief. The adrenaline in his veins loosed its iron grip. He glanced around at the faces familiar and new, lit by screens and triumph. Here were the people who had started the night locked in panic, now beaming with hard-won confidence. It was a moment he would carry for a lifetime. Victoria approached him, eyes bright. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've proven that expertise isn't measured by a degree or a title. It's measured by grit and insight." Her voice trembled with pride. "Thank you. You just saved this launch." Ethan shook his head, cheeks warming. "I didn't do it alone." He gestured at the cheering crowds and blinking consoles. "This was all of us working together." She smiled and squeezed his shoulder. "Let's go tell the board, then we'll celebrate." Minutes later, they reconvened in the boardroom. Margaret, the stern-faced board member who had once demanded an explanation, rose to her feet and cleared her throat. "I'll admit I doubted you, Mr. Cole," she began, voice projecting calm authority. "Tonight you proved that unconventional thinking can be a company's greatest asset. On behalf of the board, I commend you and Ms. Lane for the courage to take this risk." Ethan nodded, feeling a grin spread across his face. The room filled with applause once again. He spotted Tom tucked at the back, nodding in respect. The weight of the world had lifted. In its place lay something fluttering like a flag of triumph, the knowledge that he belonged here, that his hands-on wisdom mattered on this grand stage. Later, in a quieter hallway, Victoria and Ethan exchanged words away from the applause. The hum of activity echoed in the distance. She turned to him, smile soft and genuine. "You know," she said, "I've overseen hundreds of launches, but tonight was one of the most exhilarating. People forget how powerful a single insight can be." Ethan rubbed his neck, thinking of Lily, curled in bed hours ago, oblivious to the drama unfolding. "It's all for her," he said quietly. "I want her to see that her dad can stand tall no matter how fancy the arena." Victoria reached out, resting a hand on his arm. "You've given her and all of us something invaluable tonight." He let himself lean into that praise heart, thrumming with warmth. The risk had paid off beyond any engineered expectation. The reward wasn't only in saved millions or undelayed launches, it was in the belief reignited in every person who had dared to see more than a grease-stained mechanic. It was in forging trust between small-town grit and corporate ambition. As Ethan walked out into the morning light with Victoria by his side, every breath felt charged with possibility. The frost that had greeted Lily and him days earlier now melted in the promise of a new dawn, one where genuine expertise and courage could transcend any title, any obstacle. And somewhere back home, a little girl would wake up knowing her dad had saved the day, proving that even one man's steady hands could steer a company through the storm. The early morning light streamed through the tall windows of Orion Motors' boardroom, painting the polished mahogany table in warm gold. Ethan Cole sat at one end, his presentation slides glowing softly on the screen behind him. Across the table, the usual mixture of stern directors, engineers, and department heads watched him with rapt attention. At the front, Victoria Lane stood beside him, her poised confidence a steadying presence. Ethan took a moment to glance at the first slide, a crisp chart depicting the suspension test results, each data point falling perfectly within margins. He inhaled, feeling his heart settle into a measured rhythm. This was the moment he had worked toward 2 days of sleepless nights, constant recalibrations, and quiet determination. Now all he needed to do was let the numbers speak. He cleared his throat. "Good morning," he began, voice calm but firm. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Yesterday evening, we ran a full 100-cycle stress test on the damper assembly using the new calibration protocol. I'm pleased to report that not only did we stay well within design specifications, But we also saw a 12% improvement in thermal stability over the original configuration. He clicked the remote. The next slide showed side-by-side thermal graphs, the old line creeping into dangerous red zones by cycle 60, and the new tuning maintaining a steady blue-green gradient all the way through. A hum of approval rose from the engineers in the back. Ethan continued weaving each result into a narrative that underscored the practicality of hands-on expertise matched with corporate resources. He spoke of fluid viscosity adjustments, timing offsets, and the real-world parallels he had drawn from his garage days, how every make and model he'd repaired demanded its own bespoke approach. As he spoke, he noticed Marjorie Cartwright, the board's stern-faced director, lean forward, studying the data with keen interest. When Ethan hit the final slide, a simple conclusion launch on schedule, he let the silence hang for just a heartbeat. Then slowly applause rippled around the room. It started as a polite smattering and grew into a confident, broad acknowledgement of his achievement. Relief washed over him in a gentle wave, loosening the tension in his shoulders. Marjorie cleared her throat, drawing the room's attention back to the front. She rose from her seat, carrying a crisp folder in one hand. Her expression softened for the first time since Ethan's arrival. Mr. Cole, she began, voice carrying both authority and genuine warmth. This board has seen countless presentations, countless projections. Rarely do we encounter a solution so elegantly simple, yet so rigorously tested. You have not only vindicated your approach, you've demonstrated the value of practical insight in an environment often dominated by theory. Well done. Her words, concise and weighty, landed like the final piece in a complex puzzle. Tom Fairchild, the polished engineer who had so vocally doubted Ethan's unconventional methods, rose next. His usually smug smile was tempered by respect. He offered Ethan a firm handshake. "Ethan," he said, voice steady, "I'll admit I was skeptical, but I've seen the numbers. Your approach worked and saved us from a costly delay. I look forward to learning more from you." The room erupted into applause again, this time warmer, more genuine. Ethan felt his cheeks heat with pride. He caught Victoria's eye and gave her a grateful nod. She returned a bright, encouraging smile, her eyes shining with pride that mirrored his own. As the applause subsided, Victoria stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice clear today, "we celebrate not just the recovery of our launch timeline, but the spirit of collaboration that defines Orion Motors. It's a reminder that innovation can come from any corner of our company. Let's carry this momentum forward." She gestured to Ethan, who closed his presentation with a simple, "Thank you, everyone. Let's get back to making the best vehicles on the market." The formalities concluded, the boardroom buzzed with renewed energy. Conversations sparked about next steps, production schedules, and market projections. Ethan gathered his notes, feeling the hum of conversation around him rather than anxiety. Hands patted him on the back. Colleagues sought him out for a quick word of congratulations or a friendly handshake. He made his way toward the door, every step lighter than the last. Outside the room, in the corridor's gentle glow, Victoria caught up to him. "How are you feeling?" she asked, voice warm and half laughing. "Honestly," Ethan replied, exhaling, "I feel like I can breathe again." She slipped her arm through his. "You did it," she said. "Your leap of faith paid off." He slid his hand into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled scrap of paper. "I couldn't have done it without this," he said, smoothing the note with gentle care. It was Lily's handiwork in crooked purple crayon. It read, "I love you. Dad, accompanied by a clumsy heart and stick-figure family." Her bedtime ritual, Ethan explained, voice-catching. "She tacked this to the fridge so I'd find it before bed." Victoria's eyes softened. "Keep that close," she advised. "It's your greatest victory." He smiled, pressing the note back into his pocket. "I will." Later that afternoon, as Victoria and Ethan walked toward the parking structure, their footsteps echoed in the crisp hallways. He thought of Lily bouncing out of school hours earlier with a backpack too big for her shoulders and boundless energy. He wondered how he'd explain this whirlwind of boardrooms and launch dates to her, how the sticky note in purple crayon had fueled his courage on the biggest night of his life. In the lobby, Tom emerged holding 2 takeout coffee cups. He offered one to Ethan with a small grin, no mention of past doubts. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing over the steaming cup. "Congrats again." Ethan accepted it. Thanks, Tom. That means a lot. Tom inclined his head. Just don't forget us little people when you're CEO. Ethan chuckled, raising his cup. No promises on CEO, but I won't forget. As they parted ways, Ethan turned back to the glass doors, where the afternoon light played off the sleek architecture. A sense of calm resolve settled over him. He had faced doubt and come through with more than just technical success. He had earned respect, built bridges, and affirmed his place in this world. He and Victoria climbed into the sleek black SUV waiting outside the entrance. As they pulled away, Ethan spotted Marjorie and several directors gathering at the door, still discussing strategy with excited intensity. He gave a small wave, and Marjorie returned one with a thoughtful smile. Inside the vehicle, Victoria reached over and squeezed his hand. "I've never been prouder of you," she said softly. He turned to her eyes, reflecting genuine gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, your support, your belief." She shook her head. "You did the work. You took the risk. Now let's get you home to your biggest fan." Ethan leaned back in his seat, watching the cityscape unfold as they drove. The streets glimmered with the promise of possibility. He thought of the little drawing pinned to his wallet, the simple words that had felt so small, and yet carried him through the storm. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "I'm taking a day off." Victoria laughed, genuine and delighted. "You deserve it." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the day's victories settle. "First thing," he promised, "I'm going straight to the grocery store to buy the biggest box of crayons I can find." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Crayons?" He smiled. "Lily deserves new colors for her next I Love You masterpiece." The SUV slipped through the early evening traffic, carrying Ethan Cole, small-town mechanic turned corporate hero, toward home. And as the city lights shimmered around them, he felt the quiet triumph of vindication echo in his chest, not for the accolades or the saved launch, but for the knowledge that he had stood by his hands, his heart, and his daughter's unwavering faith in him. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the half-melted snow draped over Turner's garage sign, casting long, warm streaks across the concrete driveway. Ethan stood just inside the open bay doors, arms crossed against the cool air, watching Lily and Victoria beside the gleaming hood of a 1967 Mustang. Tools were scattered on a weathered picnic table nearby, wrenches, spark plugs, and a carefully folded diagram of the car's original wiring. The unmistakable scent of fresh coffee mingled with the tang of engine oil, creating a comforting aroma that felt like home. Lily, bundled in her favorite purple hoodie, held a small socket wrench with all the seriousness of a seasoned mechanic. She peered under the hood and called out, "Okay, Victoria, hold the flashlight steady. Right there, it's loose." Victoria leaned in her elegant coat, dusted with a little grease, and shone the beam exactly where Lily indicated. The two of them laughed when the bolt finally clicked into place, a crisp, decisive sound that echoed like possibility. Ethan allowed himself a quiet smile. It wasn't so long ago that the morning routine consisted of shivering in an unheated garage, rushing to get Lily to school, and worrying over the next bill. Today, every clank of metal and shared grin was proof that their world had shifted. He'd traded those solitary worries for a community of support, a partnership that had grown from one simple car repair into something far greater. He stepped forward, hands resting on his hips, and Victoria glanced up. "Morning," she called in a warm tone. "We're almost there, just tightening the last bolt." "Need a hand," Ethan offered, though face and hands were already testament to a lifetime of fixing things. Lily looked up, her eyes bright with pride. "Dad, you can catch the flashlight next time." She handed it to him with the confident authority of a mini foreman, and he chuckled, taking it as though she'd just promoted him. As he knelt down, he felt the ground give slightly under him, wet patches where the snow had surrendered to promise of spring. The Mustang's engine block gleamed in contrast to the drab winter landscape, its polished curves and vibrant blue paint sparkling like a gem. Even Lily's wide-eyed admiration reflected back at him in those metal surfaces. Victoria bent close to examine the bolt. "That should do it," she declared, and Ethan handed the flashlight back to her. Together they closed the hood, and Lily hopped onto the bumper to inspect their handiwork from above. Ethan stood brushing a hand through his hair and sipping the steaming coffee that Victoria had thoughtfully set on the edge of the table. The scent of roasted beans was sharp and invigorating, just the thing to banish any lingering morning chill. Victoria leaned against the table next to him, her breath forming small puffs in the air. "You know," she said softly, "I never imagined fixing cars could look this peaceful." She smiled at Lily, who waved the wrench triumphantly. Ethan laughed, setting down his coffee. The old days, it was just another job. But now, this, he gestured around at the trio, this is what matters. He beeped the horn lightly as Lily climbed down and the Mustang rumbled to life, its engine voice lower, richer, confident. Lily jumped back, delighted, and Ethan turned the car off with a practiced twist of the key. They all exchanged a look of shared accomplishment. In that moment, the prismatic sunbeams, the aroma of coffee and oil, the simple joy of a repaired engine, Ethan felt the full weight of everything they had overcome. The snowy hardship of yesterday had melted away, leaving only the warmth of connection and possibility. Victoria reached out and placed her hand on Ethan's arm. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice carrying the depth of her belief. "You turned a random morning stop into something that's changed all our lives." He nodded, emotion catching in his throat. "Couldn't have done it without you," he managed, glancing at Lily's drawing taped to the garage wall, a stick figure family holding hands under a big yellow sun. "And without Lily's constant reminders that I'm the best fixer ever." Lily beamed at the mention, her small chest puffing up with pride. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and a handful of crayons. "I thought we could draw our next project," she announced, pulling up a chair and starting a rainbow arc across the page. Victoria knelt beside her, leaning in to help choose colors. "What about that avocado green vintage truck you always talk about fixing?" she asked. Lily's eyes lit up. "Yes, and we'll add a garage." "That's you, Dad, right here," she said, sketching a tiny figure with grease-stained overalls next to a big smile. Ethan took the pencil and joined in, adding a little red heart above their drawn family. "And that's you and Mom watching," he said gently, though the girl they talked about had passed away years ago. But in Lily's world, her mother lived on in every imagined scene, every hope dragging them forward. Victoria settled back on the table's edge, watching the two of them. "I've always believed in second chances," she said. "But this seeing you two work together, this is the best one I could ask for." He sipped his coffee again, warmth spreading from the cup through his chest. Above them the sky had turned clear, the pale blue promising days ahead. The snow around the driveway had receded further, leaving only patches that glistened under the garage lights and early sun. Ethan drew a tiny Old Glory flag flapping atop their little garage on the paper. "You remember when I thought big dreams were out of my reach, that I was just a grease monkey in a cold shop? Now I realize big dreams start small." He handed the drawing back to Lily. "Thanks for helping me see that." Lily fluttered her eyelashes like a seasoned artist receiving praise. "Any time, Dad. You do the fixing, I do the drawing." She held up the crayon next to her sketch, proud as could be. Victoria laughed, a bright, clear sound that mingled perfectly with the rumble of the city awakening outside. "One day," she said, standing and stretching, "we'll hang these drawings up where everyone can see." Ethan rose as well, wiping his hands on a rag he had tucked into the back pocket of his jeans. The garage, once dark and silently lonely in the depth of winter, now felt like a sanctuary of laughter and color. The walls seemed to glow with newfound life. He placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "All right, team," he said. "Let's get this beauty started." "We've got a date with Destiny." Lily hopped down and grabbed her bright green safety goggles, ready for action, while Victoria retrieved another steaming cup of coffee from the workbench. Ethan traded his initial half-drunk cup for a fresh one, then climbed sotto voce onto the engine bay to retighten a few final fittings, just to be sure. As they settled back into their respective tasks, the soft click of tools against metal, the clink of coffee mugs, and the scratch of crayons against paper wove together into a morning symphony. The world outside was awakening distant car engines, starting birds chirping and thawing trees. Neighbors stepping onto porches to greet the day. But here in the heart of a once struggling garage turned home, their own kind of dawn was unfolding, a personal spring after winter's trial. Ethan remembered the first time he'd met Victoria on that frosted roadside, her coat sleek against the bleak backdrop. His simple act of kindness posing no promise. Yet that single moment had blossomed into trust. shared dreams, and a life filled with possibility. He glanced at Victoria's profile. Her eyes lit with satisfaction as she watched Lily draw and felt a surge of gratitude. Then he looked at Lily. Hair falling in untamed curls, bright eyes alight with creative fire, and recognized that every wrench turned, every smile shared was proof that second chances weren't just fairy tales. They were real living things forged in moments of kindness and nurtured by resilience. Ethan set his coffee carefully on the fender, wiped his hands, and hopped down. He joined Victoria and Lily by the picnic table, wrapping an arm around both of their shoulders. "Here's to new dawns," he said, his voice steady and full. "To fresh starts, and to believing that one small act, one bolt tightened, or one car fixed can change everything." They raised their mugs in a silent toast, the warm liquid inviting energy and hope. Outside, the last patches of snow continued to melt, revealing fresh green grass beneath. The Mustang's engine began a soft hum when Lily gave it another playful honk, as if echoing their triumphant spirit. And in that moment, coffee in hand, engine oil in the air, laughter at their backs, Ethan Cole knew that their journey was only beginning. They had built something far stronger than a garage or a corporate career. They had built a family bound by kindness, resilience, and the undeniable truth that when we reach out with a helping hand, we open the door to whole new worlds.